Welcome back to part two of our week one asynchronous lecture, response to your written discussion questions. The students in COM 2113 Media Culture and Social Influence. We're trying to narrow the amount of questions we tackle, but hopefully contrast that with a deeper, richer response. That helps us kind of make some strides, and also link together commonality between the questions. And so this is a little bit of a different approach than I have personally worked with in the past. I'm excited to be able to explore different ways to for us to engage the content. And so sometimes that's a feeling out process, and we just kind of have to give it our best shot and see where it takes us. One way in which it's a little bit different than usual, as I alluded to in part one, is don't have necessarily printouts of all the questions where I've kind of marked and done like that classical editorial professorial mode of like writing in the margins and stressing things that you're writing it and giving it and kind of probing it in that intellectual stylistic way. But instead, this is a very 21st century method, I guess we could say. I've got multiple monitors up and questions kind of across various screens, and I'm kind of doing a little bit of a beautiful mind like pull and piece and pull between questions. It's a little bit out of order, but we're trying to bring order to this conversation through your questions. So let me start with Lauren. I think I've got an understanding of how her first question kind of picks up where we were leading off in the previous response, and then it's going to lead into a couple of other questions from other students, including Maria, including Heather, okay, among others. In the previous segment, we were talking about questions. Layla brought up issues about trusting media and the legitimacy of buy-in, and maybe the performative nature of cable news, especially, and this was leading us to a point of being cautious viewers, learning how to switch off emotional manipulation that sometimes media attempts through certain stylistics, certain types of the way that they communicate information to us. It could be the way a person communicates, like their charisma, or the way a program is produced, right, as a text, as an artifact that's kind of might be antagonizing a given issue. And we want to be able to kind of formalize an objectivist perspective, and that might sound boring or stuffy, but it doesn't have to be. It really doesn't. But the point is being able to take information in, and be able to process it for what it is, and not what it's seeking to do to us and through us, if that makes sense. And so let me use that to dovetail into Lauren's first question here. In the introduction to, I believe, Media and Society, okay, Berger's Media and Society, A Critical Perspective, the author states, quote, "In this book, I've put my discussion of media ethics in the chapter on artists and creators, since they are the people," this is not at Lauren's questions, "since they are the people who most directly face ethical problems in creating their texts," end quote, page 4. He goes on to pose questions of what is or is not ethical to write and communicate about. I wonder, who really sets the standard for ethics in media? There's several questions here, so I may kind of pick it up and then pause and then pick it up. Is it the population and what the people are willing to consume? There are questions over the years. There is questions that over the years, the standard for ethics in media, all forms of entertainment, has changed. Who sets the standard ultimately? All right, very good. And I think this is a nice tie-in, because this is where we were getting of, well, who's making these decisions? And is there, Layla was concerned with, is there bias or how do we identify biases in news media? And I think, let me pause and remind us this. Traditional journalists are trained in minimizing bias. And I don't think I put it in just such simple terms in my initial response. But traditional journalism schools train those copywriters, those researchers in rigid ethics that are about seeking little t truths, right? To borrow a phrasing in philosophy, right? Truth that is to say, a little t truth, a claim or a thesis or a position or hypothesis or a position that can be supported through evidence, that can be substantiated based on sharing other information. That is a journalistic ethic, okay? The problem that we get into in modern culture, and when we start dovetailing journalism with television or talk radio, some forms, not all, but increasingly, maybe even podcasts, is that there is also this added pressure to entertain. And so entertainment is about making aesthetic choices, right? It's about entertaining and through whatever means necessary that fits within the prescribed identity of the artifact. So a program's identity, right? You think about how a show is shaped, what its makeup is, but also maybe the identity of the audience. This is going to tie into a question a little bit later. So we're thinking about these things in conversation with one another. What the text is, its identity, but also the audience, who it's intended for. We're getting somewhere now, and that's important. These relationships matter. They matter in mass media. They increasingly matter to journalists because what we've seen is traditional journalism was on a decline alongside print, right? So as print medium was declining, journalism had to find new avenues of expression, new audiences to identify with. And part of that, for some, we're not going to say all, for some meant creative compromise. And creative compromise manifests itself in the form of a more entertaining, stylistic approach to providing the news, okay, as opposed to just straightforward means of providing the news. Those that were willing, perhaps have bought into the kind of news presentation that, instead of backing away from biases, leans into it. And why would they lean into it? Well, they would lean into more of a biased approach to news because that's more enticing. It's more like interesting to an audience, even at an unconscious level. So in other words, the audience comes to a program. They, like the journalists, also have biases, preconceived biases toward certain ideas. So if you're a producer of a program and you can understand what your audience is after, and you start to tailor a message to them that gives them information in a way that they desire, that they greatly desire to receive, well, then all of a sudden you are making a deeper connection between the program or the artifact, or a cultural artifact, or what we also call a text, and the consumer or audience, right? The person that is receiving it. The receiver, that's a tie into that's a breadcrumb for a week 2 reading that we get into. The receiver of the communication message. And of course, that's in the opening chapter of Messages when Berger's talking about the communication process. And so the big shift that took place was we went from a place of just giving people information because it's the public thing to do in a democracy, right? It's an ethical decision to be transparent about X, Y, Z, right, whatever topic, to a place where it's television. We've all grown up with television, it's news and it's TV. And by the way, we want to make it exciting. And we know you have certain leanings and interests. And we're also going to try to cater our stories to those leanings, to those interests, because it's in our best interest. It makes us money. It helps our bottom line. For, let's say, a cable news company that's owned by a large media corporation that's also publicly traded on the stock exchange. And so there's all of these factors that, like, blip, 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 they influence one another. Wow, we are not ready to take that kind of information in as, John Q, Jane Q public, okay? This is where the disconnect happens. People are not, it is information overload to process all of the various mechanisms at work that go into, news, contemporary broadcast journalism, and that sort of thing. That being said, right, time out. There's still those people out there that are trying to follow, let's call it the straight and narrow path of traditional journalism, right? High ethos, high ethics, ethical appeal to their work, right? Rigor, doing lots of research to uncover important information, but also be accurate, be authentic, locate trustworthy sources, verify those sources. The problem is that there are so many voices. There's so many voices competing out there, from very experienced to growing inexperienced to novice, to even counter cultural, maybe unethical voices, that it is hard to discern between all of this. And so we need sharper, I don't know, like, I want to make like a primal example here, right? We need sharper claws. We need sharper teeth, or what have you. Like, we need sharper cognitive skills to discern between this, and to not be as easily moved in certain cases. Not to be numb to it all. I don't think that is a solution, but to be able to navigate it, right? And this is where we find ourselves in the digital age, because information is free-flowing out there. And everyone, all writers, professional writers, content creators, journalists, they're fighting for space. And meanwhile, large companies and firms and everything have kind of refined all of these just beautifully engaging practices down to what we call content. They've just given it a shorthand term, content. And there's a problem with that, in that if anything is content, just like we refer to things as texts, right? If anything is content, then for some people, it doesn't matter what the content is. If it sells, if it sells, then we were going to move it, right? And this is where we come into conflict with people completely willing to kind of stir the pot hard, right? They're going to stir that, let's say, melting pot, right? That is to say, the U.S. and perhaps other areas of the world into a frenzy, because that can also generate momentum and revenue and viewers and ratings and all of those things. And so what I've identified really is like the greedier side that often is in tension with those seeking to get information out. Let me talk about a completely different topic that adds tension. That is to say, remember, we have those traditionally trained, highly ethical, rigorous journalists out there. Well, they don't necessarily get all the sweet gigs anymore. They have to fight for them against who else? Oh, lots of, let's say, public figures, or just much more creative or much more expressive communicators. Dare we even say, in some cases, like performers or people already coming into the conversation in a place of privilege. And so they get to kind of like kind of come in and sort of like squeeze out maybe those drier, more elongated voices. And so you have this tension between, people that are just making a living being great entertainers, great sort of I don't know, gossip specialists, right? We can even think about topics like everything from economics to politics as open to a kind of gossip-esque approach, right? This op-ed-ification of journalism. And so these are tensions that we see in place. And so who sets the standard? I'm returning to that final question that Lauren poses. And I think our answer is many people are activating voices. But ultimately, who sets the standards? Well, the producers, like who's in charge of not just a cable newsroom, but who's above them, right? Who do they answer to? And we have seen in recent decades, to use an example, right? Let's say over at Fox News for many years, you had Rupert Murdoch identifying that he could create highly profitable newsrooms if they would lean into very melodramatic territory with how they presented news, and also if they would skew the information that they presented into more of a distinct category of what a powerful and large demographic of audience is going to be predisposed to receive. And so they did do that, and then Roger Ailes helped oversee that, right, for a great many years. Some of those poignant years where Fox News just kind of went up, and really kind of gained a lot of steam and momentum. But power and responsibility and things as they are, there are many complications, many problems, many wrong decisions made along that way as well. And we see ramifications of that in different ways that we could like unpack, but it would take a while to do that. Who sets this standard? I think this is a gateway to mentioning a specific type of media theory, and that would be agenda setting theory. I'm going to pause there, leave it at that for now. It's a perfect time to kind of have another segment break. And then we might use agenda theory to springboard into where we want to take this asynchronous kind of lecture conversation in the future segments, to continue through the voices that are currently participating in week 1 of COM 2113. All right, so hang tight. I definitely feel us moving through some important content and gaining our own perspective on mass media.